9 German fighters, diving from 16,000 feet, speed 399 watts. Their target, a lone U.S. rookie in a P-47 Thunderbolt, was flying at just 7,000 feet. No wingman, no cloud cover, no backup, time to contact 12.5 seconds. His radio was broken. The flight leader was too far west to help. He'd been ordered never to dogfight, never to roll below 8,000 feet, and under no circumstance to turn fight a Bf-109. He broke all 3 rules. When the first 2 German fighters dove past, they expected a dive and run. Instead, he skidded the 10-ton Thunderbolt sideways at 200 mm/s, nose still level, prop torque snapping the nose out of their firing angle. They called it in. A panicked voice cut through Luftwaffe comms. Zieht nicht. Rutscht seitlich. Wir treffen ihn nicht. He's not turning. He's sliding sideways. We can't hit him. What followed was 4 minutes of chaos. 9 German fighters missed. 3 went down, and a maneuver the manuals called impossible was quietly copied and never named. France-Germany border. March 1944. Mission Recon Escort, low altitude, and the Thunderbolt's manual called what he did suicidal. They called it a flying brick. Not enemies, his own instructors. The P-47 Thunderbolt, officially the Republic, P-47 D-22 variant, had power and armor, but no elegance. At full load, 17,500 pounds, it was the heaviest single-engine fighter in the war. It could dive like a comet, take a hit from a 20mm cannon, and still come home on 1 cylinder, but in turns in rolls below 8,000 feet. It was dead weight. Cadet Matthew. Russ knew this firsthand. At 18, he was already on the edge. He'd washed out of formation training once, stalling in a crosswind turn near the end of Phase 2. Transferred from a P-40 unit. Got reassigned to P-47s, not because he earned it, but because no one else wanted the slot. That thing doesn't dogfight, one cadet told him. You just fly high and pray you don't get bounced. Instructors drilled it hard. Use altitude. Dive to disengage. Never try to roll at low speed. The P-47's roll rate dropped below 70 degrees per second under 200 mm/s. The thick elliptical wings bled energy in shallow turns, and the wide fuselage made rudder response sluggish in horizontal skids. But Russ kept flying solo after hours, in low power zones over the desert, practicing something he'd felt once by mistake, when a mistrimmed rudder and chopped throttle caused the Thunderbolt to swing sideways in a weird yaw, not a slip, not a skid. Something in between. The nose would jerk 15 degrees left, the fuselage would tilt, and then it would snap back. His instructors saw it one morning, flying overhead. You lose your cable tension. No, sir. You meant to do that. Maybe. The instructor said nothing more. But later that day, Russ was pulled from a scheduled flight, grounded for maintenance hold. It lasted 5 days. No records, no explanation. Just a warning. Don't experiment at low altitude. But Rusk couldn't shake the feeling. That move, whatever it was, let him redirect heading without banking. The plane stayed level. It was fast, it was violent, and it scared him. But it also felt like an answer. Until one day in March, over the border near Saarbrücken, he was flying escort for a recon flight. His flight leader lost radio. The escort split in the haze, and Rusk was left alone. At 7,000 feet, just as radar picked up 9 German fighters closing in, all he had was a Thunderbolt, a fuel load under 50%, and a maneuver no one believed existed. Then the first enemy dove straight down his tail. Doctrine said one thing the P-47 Thunderbolt was not to turn. Not below 15,000 feet, not under 220 km, and never against a Bf-109. Every briefing drove it in boom and zoom only, high-speed passes with disengagement climbs. At lower altitudes, the Thunderbolt's mass became an anchor. It took nearly 7 seconds to roll through 180 degree at 190 mph, and rudder response was delayed by wing inertia. Enemy pilots knew this. BF-109s, especially the G6 and G10 variants, excelled at vertical reversals and tight climb spirals. Their lighter frames allowed roll rates over 120 degrees sec, and at low altitudes, their nose response was superior. Against a heavy Thunderbolt forced into turns, it was a shooting gallery. Rusk's aircraft wasn't even fully armed. His centerline tank had just been dropped. But his ammo counters still showed 60% on his 50 calibers, and the right wing gun was jammed from a previous test fire. That left 5 functioning guns barely. Instructors had mocked the idea of low-speed roll recovery. The P-47's wing loading was 47 lbs FT2, nearly double that of the Spitfire. Its massive 4-blade prop created enormous torque, and the aircraft had a habit of dipping right under full throttle. Coordinated turns required planning. Reversal rolls were sluggish, skids nearly impossible to control without entering a side-slip stall. But Rusk had found something strange. If he reduced throttle to 40%, applied partial flaps, 15 degrees, and kicked left rudder just as the nose dipped, the Thunderbolt didn't stall. Instead, the torque swing caused a yaw snap, a lateral rotation that twisted the aircraft 10-15 degrees off-axis without needing a full bank. It wasn't a turn, it was a controlled skip. At 190, 210 mph, it worked. At 180 mph, it became dangerous. Below that, it could kill him. No one believed it mattered. "You'll never need it," his tech officer told him. "If you're that low, you're already dead." But Rusk couldn't forget the move. He called it the flat skip. A mistake the first time. A choice after. On March 18th, he was flying recon escort in heavy haze. 2 aircraft broke off to the east. Rusk was circling solo at 7,000 feet, watching for return signals, when his set crackled bandits. 9, coming down fast. "You've got less than 15 seconds. He scanned the top sky. Sun glare, trails, specks turning into sharks. They were diving hard, already below 14,000 feet and screaming in. Doctrinal logic said dive, run, use mass and gravity. But Rusk stayed level, because he was about to see if the maneuver everyone mocked was the one that would keep him alive. The sky over the Saarbrücken ridge was layered with broken haze. Beneath the sunburst, Rusk flew a shallow right turn at 7,200 feet, keeping his Thunderbolt level at 205 mph. His leader had vanished east 10 minutes earlier, and the remaining escort wing was well beyond visual contact. He was alone without radio, without vector, and worst of all, without doctrine that fit what came next. Radar tracked the German Group First 9 BF-109s in a descending fan, forming an angled stack at 16,000 feet and closing from northwest, heading 128 degrees. Their lead pair were diving steep at 390 mph, already past 11 miles, and shrinking the gap by a mile every 9 seconds. Rusk saw their contrails flatten as they broke formation. Count 9. Spacing 3 elements. Approach angle high vertical. 30 degrees sun offset. Time to contact 18 seconds. He didn't climb. He didn't dive. He tightened his turn slightly, then pulled back throttle to 60%. Trimmed the nose down 1.2 goom and took a breath. The Thunderbolt began bleeding speed. 205, 198. 193 map. He kicked in a left rudder, not hard, just enough to yaw the nose. The move felt wrong. Every inch of training told him to run, but something else told him, try it. At 12 seconds, the first 2 BF-109s dropped through 12,000 feet. Spacing tight, a line for a classic high-speed slashing pass. They weren't looking to dogfight, just dive, fire, extend, reclimb. Rusk gave them an angle, not a real one. His partial yaw made the P-47 appear to be banking left, but the wings stayed flat. The Germans adjusted, one going wide, the other tightening his dive path. At 6 seconds, they were under 4,000 feet from him vertically. Rusk's airspeed had stabilized at 191 mph. Any lower, and the plane would be in stall zone if mishandled. The skip had to come now. He slammed throttle to 30%, yanked rudder left, and rolled 3 degrees into a nose-level yaw. The Thunderbolt didn't bank. It lurched sideways. From the German's view, he slid. The lead Bf-109 adjusted fire too late. His burst stitched 20-millimeter shells into empty sky, missing by 30 feet. The second fighter corrected overshot. One called out on comms, sieht nicht, dreht nicht. He's not pulling, he's not turning. Rusk had vanished beneath them, still level. But facing a new heading by 14 degrees, he tried to breathe. But the next trio of Bf-109s was already vectoring in. This time from his 9 o'clock high, and they weren't diving blind. They were aiming where he would be. The next element of 3 Bf-109s came in smarter. They weren't rushing the pass, they arced in wide, using coordinated altitude steps to layer their attack. One at 10,500 feet, one just below 9,000, and the third climbing slightly to bracket the bottom edge in case Rusk dove. It was a kill funnel. Rusk checked his airspeed, 193 map. Not enough to break away in a climb. Too slow to dive safely without stalling the Thunderbolt's sluggish wing, and far too slow to enter a full banking turn without losing lateral control. He pulled partial flaps, 15 degrees, same as before, and held left rudder steady. Then he did something no one had taught. He let go of the ailerons. The aircraft twitched. Not rolled. Twitched. The big fuselage shifted slightly off axis, just enough to change nose angle. By 7 degrees without banking. He added throttle 70% just for torque, and the nose kicked sideways again. The Thunderbolt skipped. Leftward this time. From above, the 109s couldn't predict it. The second fighter dived hard, lining up his shot at 400 yards, only to see the jug lurch out of sight just as he fired. His tracers vanished into empty air. The third pilot, below, didn't adjust fast enough. He came in too tight. Rusk reacted. Throttle max, rudder off center. He rolled left and pitched up in one sharp movement. The Thunderbolt hesitated, then swung its nose around with brute torque. The German was dead center in his gun sight. Rusk fired a 1.1 second burst from 550 cals. All 5 hit. Flames erupted from the Messerschmitt's engine, cowling. The aircraft tried to pull up, staggered, and then spiraled into a slow right roll. It didn't explode. It simply fell. Rusk didn't celebrate. He reset the trim, neutralized the rudder, and pulled flaps back. His heart pounded. His left hand shook. But his ears caught something that stopped everything. A German voice crackling over his damaged radio channel, probably bleeding through from open Luftwaffe comms. Wo ist er hin? Ich habe ihn wieder verloren. Where did he go? I've lost him again. The combat geometry was breaking. The German plan was fracturing. But they weren't done. From the west, 2 Bf-109s that had stayed wide now turned in, boxing him against the ridge line. Altitude 6th 200 hour FTE, fuel 42%, ammunition 280 rounds left across 5 guns. He had 1 broken weapon, 5 enemies still in the sky. And now the Germans knew he wasn't running. They began to encircle him, and this time they brought patience. The Germans had seen enough. Their lead flight had overshot. The second wave had lost one of their own. But now, the final 4 Bf-109s stopped chasing. They slowed their entries, widened their arcs, and dropped into a loose circle. They weren't going for speed, they were hurting him. Altitude 6,000 feet, and falling. Rusk's Thunderbolt was boxed in over the ridge south of Forbach, with open farmland beneath and no cover above. The 109s maintained vertical discipline. Two floated high around 700-800 feet, circling to beta climb, while the other two flanked east and west, keeping him locked in a lateral kill zone. Rusk saw it. He checked his fuel, 39%. He could dive out, but they'd chase. He could climb, but they'd collapse the trap. So he tried his move again. Same entry partial flaps, 15 degree, throttle chopped to 40%. Sharp left rudder, nose angle offset. The Thunderbolt began its sideways yaw, but one of the Germans predicted it. From the west, the flanking 109 anticipated the flat drift and tightened his arc early. He met Rusk mid-skip, caught his vector, and fired from 280 yards. Hits. Tracers chewed across the Thunderbolt's starboard side. The first 5 skipped low, but the 6th round clipped the lower rudder fin. A jolt ran through the frame. The rudder jammed halfway right. The plane twisted offline. Rusk yanked opposite rudder. No response. He pushed elevator sluggish. Roll input came late. The aircraft was bleeding energy. He needed to dive. But now the high pair began descending, using his hesitation to strike. The first dove passed at 370 map, firing a long burst that sliced just above Rusk's canopy. The second stayed high, hovering like a bird of prey. Rusk pulled throttle to 80%, trying to escape into a shallow right turn. But the Thunderbolt fought him rudder unresponsive, elevator heavy. A turn now would only slow him, so he tried the skip again, this time using the right rudder, but the control was jammed. The aircraft jerked, then kicked sideways in the wrong direction. It wasn't a maneuver anymore. It was a fall. The nose dipped. The wings wobbled. Airspeed 181 ap. Flap still half out, altitude dropping. He was skidding, unbalanced, low, and now visibly wounded. He heard a German call on the radio, clearer this time. Jetzt, kann sich nicht mehr bewegen. Now. Now he can't move anymore. 2 109s broke formation and turned in for the kill. Rusk gritted his teeth, eyes on the altimeter. 400 feft, 100. He needed control. Now, or he was going into the trees at 210 MEP with a twisted tail and no plan. The nose dropped too fast. Rusk's hand snapped to the stick full aft. The Thunderbolt didn't level. It sagged left, nose down, with rudder input useless and aileron lagging. Altitude 3,900 feet, falling at over 1,400 FTmin. Airspeed climbing 222, 236, 247 me peaks. It was no longer a maneuver. It was a falling brick. He cut throttle to idle, hoping to reduce torque. Nothing. The prop drag now added to the yaw. The aircraft began to rotate slowly right, its center line slipping out of alignment, spinning just enough to lose lift. He was near a flat spin. He punched flaps to full 30 degree to generate drag and yanked left stick with everything he had. The roll took 2.7 seconds in eternity at 210 MEP. The wings came level. Altitude 2, 800 power. Then the Thunderbolt dropped again. A BF-109 came diving in from his 4 o'clock. Nose down, already firing. Russ saw the tracers, a long stream of 20mm shells ripping past his canopy, missing by less than 8 feet. One round grazed his left elevator tip, enough to rattle the frame, but not enough to break it. He couldn't dodge. His hands felt numb. The controls were barely responding. He yanked throttle back to 60%, trying to steady airflow across the stabilizers. The aircraft staggered, nose still dipped, speed bleeding to 190 map. Then the rudder kicked back. For a half second, the tension released. It was jammed by torque, not damage. He centered the rudder, neutralized roll, and trimmed nose sub 0.5 degree up. Now level flight, barely. Altitude 200 feet. He dropped nearly 5,000 feet in less than 90 seconds. Any further, and tree cover would block escape paths. He needed sky, but the second 109 wasn't finished. It pulled high, banking into a vertical loop. Rusk watched it rise, stall over, and dive like a hammer coming down. He was still out of options. His skip move had failed. The rudder had betrayed him. His energy was gone. But then, something flickered in his mind. He had one more idea. A reversal mid-stall, mid-skid, not a drift, not a bank, but a timed nose yaw using torque, flap drag, and delayed throttle. It wasn't written in any manual. He didn't even know if it was possible, but if it worked, it would put the Thunderbolt sideways just long enough to throw off the German solution curve. One chance. He reset flaps to 15 degrees, set throttle to 45%, and waited for the 109 to commit to the dive. 3 seconds. 2. The nose sparkled with fire. Shells inbound. 1. He chopped throttle, jammed full rudder, and pulled a micro-roll left. The aircraft didn't turn. It didn't roll. It slid sideways just enough. The nose of the Thunderbolt yawed 14 degrees left, but the wings remained level. From the Germans' view, it looked like the Jug was beginning a shallow bank, but instead of committing, it stalled mid-motion. That's when the 109 fired too early, too shallow. Tracers cut under Rusk's right wingtip, missing by 20 feet. He'd pulled off something no instructor had ever explained, something that defied P-47 doctrine, a torque-assisted skip yaw that twisted the aircraft's heading without full aileron use. It only worked under 3 conditions: airspeed between 186-202 mph, partial flap deployment, 15 2 throttle near idle for 1 to 2 seconds before application of full opposite torque. It wasn't a true side slip. It wasn't a rudder stall. It was an engine-induced drift roll that pivoted the nose just enough to throw off a firing solution and could be reversed within 1.8 seconds if the pilot trimmed quickly. The key was the prop. The massive 12-foot Curtiss electric 4-blade propeller on the P-47D produced immense torque at low throttle, especially in dense air under 5,000 feet. With the rudder free again, Rusk had used that stored twist to yaw his nose while keeping wings neutral, essentially dragging the entire aircraft sideways with power. It came from accident. He discovered it while mishandling trim on landing approach weeks earlier, but now it was keeping him alive. He climbed shallow, just plausible à la pitch, regained 300 feet, and retrimmed to neutral. The German didn't press a second dive. Instead, he circled high. Rusk ran quick checks, flaps responsive, rudder stiff, but back. Fuel 31%, ammunition under 200 rounds total. He had space again. A mile's radius, a patch of sky, a battered Thunderbolt. But the circle above him wasn't breaking. At least 3 Bf-109 still orbited in a loose triangle, trying to bait him into climbing or running, and now they knew he could skip. They began banking high arcs using overbank rolls to float above his nose, forcing him to guess where the dive would come from. If he moved too soon, he'd show a profile. If he waited too long, they'd land a vertical shot. And they were patient. But Rusk had one more move left, based on the maneuver that shouldn't work. A full reverse, not a skip. A slide fake. He prepped for it, throttle down, trim nose low, flaps half out. He'd only get one chance. Because if they figured out the rhythm of the yaw, they wouldn't miss again. 3 Bf-109s hovered above in a loose triangle, 7,000 to 7,500 feet, wide spacing, circling Rusk like hawks. Below them, the Thunderbolt held steady at 2,400 feet, wings level, speed at 196 maps. From their perspective, he was boxed. Altitude advantage was absolute. Escape options, 0. But Rusk had prepared the trap first. He trimmed the nose 1.2 to ground down, pulled 15 to ground flaps, and eased the throttle to 40% right at the yaw threshold. Then he rolled slightly left, not enough to initiate a real turn, just enough to suggest desperation. A move that said he's running. It worked. One of the BF-109s committed. The highest one call sign Dorn dove from 7,500 feet. Shallow entry, 360 MEP, lining up a long deflection shot. He expected the jug to bank hard and try to dive, but the Thunderbolt did neither. 3 seconds. Rusk let the 109 close. His airspeed ticked up to 201 up here, right at the torque snap limit. 2 seconds. Dorn opened fire, long stream of tracers. Rusk chopped throttle, yanked full right rudder, kicked slight left aileron, and won. The Thunderbolt skipped left again. But this time, Rusk reversed the input instantly. He slammed the stick right, counter rudder, and goose throttle to 70%. The aircraft didn't just slide, it whiplashed, swinging the nose from 114-degree left to 11-degree right in just 1.6 seconds. Dorn overshot, his tracers cut into open air, 30 feet left of Rusk's fuselage. As he passed, Rusk rolled shallow right, aimed high, and squeezed the trigger. 0.9-second burst. 5 50 cals roared, hits across the fuselage, fire in the midsection. Dorn tried to roll out, but his engine choked and exploded mid-air. Kill 2. Rusk leveled again, speed now 187 feet, dangerously close to stall. The 2 remaining Germans panicked. Their tight triangle broke. One rolled vertical too fast and pulled out early. The other tried to arc behind Rusk's tail, climbing shallow, but Rusk had anticipated this too. He skipped again. This time, a full flat yaw to left with no throttle change, just rudder and flap. The Thunderbolt slid 10 degrees, enough to break the Germans' firing line. Rusk fired again 3 seconds and clipped the German's right wing. The 109 peeled out, hit, trailing smoke, kill 3. Rusk's Thunderbolt was now shaking. Elevator stiff, flaps rattling, ammunition down to less than 100 rounds. The final BF-109 circled wide, no longer aggressive. He'd seen enough. But Rusk had a final escape to make. Oil temp, 274 degrees. Fuel, 18%, altitude 2,000 feet. German ground fire stations likely ahead if he ran straight. He rolled shallow left, last skip. Nose drifted 9 again, then punched throttle to full and dove to treetop level. 109 gave chase, but didn't fire. He climbed away after a minute. Rusk was alone again. Alive, out of ammo, out of altitude, nearly out of time. He was headed west, but his Thunderbolt had taken hits, and the flaps were jammed open. Rusk leveled out just 80 feet above the trees, his Thunderbolt skimming the hills at 225 ilip. Maybe every control surface felt stiff. The flaps were stuck at 15 degrees, throwing off trim. Oil temperature had crept to 280 degrees, hovering just below red line. His engine sounded tight, too tight. He banked shallow right, hugging a forest line that paralleled the front. He was headed west-southwest, toward the Moselle sector, where friendly lines had been reported the day before. He had no radio, no bearings, just a damaged fighter and 17% fuel. Below, farmland blurred by, a church steeple flashed. Then a column of smoke, a flak position. No, just a barn fire. He leveled again. A turn now could stall the aircraft. He needed to keep speed and airflow up to avoid dropping into a flat sink. A warning light blinked low fuel, remaining enough for 14 minutes at cruise, less under stress. He dropped to 220 map, pulling every ounce from the damaged Pratt & Whitney engine. Then came the final shadow. Behind him, another BF-109 had circled back. Just one. No attack yet. But it was there. Distant. Following. Rusk knew he couldn't outrun it. Not this low. Not with jammed flaps and a trimmed-out rudder. He couldn't turn either. Not sharply. Not with partial control. So he did what he'd done 3 times before. He skipped. Throttle dropped to 45%, nose pitched down, 0.8 degree. Flaps still stuck at 15 Full left rudder. The P-47 jolted, slid sideways 9 yawing left in a skid, not to fight, just to warn. The 109 didn't follow. Whoever was behind that stick had seen the last fight and chose not to repeat it. He peeled off. Russ didn't see him again. Now clear. He climbed slightly +2 degrees, just enough to see the treetops fall away into a valley. He spotted a dirt strip American field unit. Temporary forward airstrip, 3,600 FT long. He lined up. Final approach, 127 MPH. Gear down, plane unsteady. The touchdown was rough. The left gear collapsed halfway down the strip. The Thunderbolt skidded to a halt in a spray of dust and sparks barely controlled. Ground crew sprinted to the wreck. One waved a sidearm. Another held binoculars. Pilot ID, Rusk. He coughed. 3rd Recon Escort. They didn't believe him until they saw the holes in the fuselage, and the gun camera reel jammed, but intact. Then came the review. Command called in. Scribes took notes. The film showed 3 confirmed kills, 2 overshoots, 1 probable damaged, all while turning a P-47 in ways no manual described. Rusk sat in the shade, helmet off, oil stain. One mechanic handed him water. "You turn that big brick like a Spitfire." "No," he said. Then how, he didn't answer. But one of the ground crew looked over the wreck and whispered, "Those 109s had no idea what he was doing, and neither did HQ." The film reel didn't lie. Gun camera footage showed 3 separate kill bursts, 1.1 seconds, 0.9 seconds, and 1.3 seconds. Each sequence was clean, with visible hits, wing root, engine cowling, fuselage fire. Even more striking were the angles. None of the shots came from traditional turn fights. Every firing solution was built on flat entry skips or sudden nose pivots. At 800 hours the next morning, Rusk was called into the forward operations tent, a folding chair. 3 officers, 1 intelligence major, 1 colonel from Flight Command, and 1 grim-faced lieutenant from Training Review. They rolled the footage once, then again. "Is this a stall?" the major asked. "No, sir." Rusk replied, "Intentional yaw." "Impossible," the colonel said. "Thunderbolt doesn't yaw clean below 200. Rusk didn't argue. The lieutenant spoke next. "You used flap during maneuver?" "Yes, sir. 15 degrees. Below stall limit?" "Yes." Silence. The colonel stood. "You got lucky. Could have killed yourself. This isn't doctrine. These aren't approved procedures. You had no authority to engage with less than a full element." Rusk remained silent. Then the colonel delivered the decision. Effective immediately. Lieutenant Rusk is grounded from combat flights pending review. Pilot to remain stateside for reassignment. Film to be classified under internal review. Just like that, his combat tour ended. He had defied doctrine. He had saved himself. He had humiliated a German squadron, and they tried to erase it. But word spreads differently in war. The gun camera footage was duplicated, once officially, once not. By the time Rusk boarded a transport plane 2 weeks later, a copy had quietly made its way to a training wing in Italy. Instructors began referencing a pivot slip in off-record briefings. No manuals, no flight envelopes, just a rumor. If the rudder still works and you've got altitude to burn, there's a way to make the jug skip sideways. The footage never made it to official training reels, but one photo did. A still frame of a P-47 yawed 15 degrees with flaps out, tracers missing wide behind it. Captioned only "Unorthodox Evasive, 1944, Pilot Unknown, back at HQ." Rusk's file was marked with a notation, "Exceeds aggression envelope." does not conform to formation doctrine, but two gunnery officers kept a copy of his reel, and a year later, one of them brought it to a briefing for pilots preparing to fly ground attack runs into Germany. He said only watch what this guy does, and pray you never have to. Rusk had landed with a jammed rudder, failing elevator, and flaps locked open. The plane was towed, never flown again. But the footage kept flying. Officially, Rusk's maneuver never entered the manuals. The P-47 remained a high-speed dive and climb platform in Allied doctrine. Training materials emphasized altitude advantage, coordinated rollouts, and conservative rudder use below 10,000 feet. There was no mention of flat yaws, skip maneuvers, or torque throws. But the whispers grew anyway. At least two airfields in Italy and southern France began using the phrase combat slip during off-hours training. Not taught formally, just shared. Usually by ground crew, sometimes by returning pilots. It began in small ways. A rookie in a jug asked about evading late in a turn fight. A veteran instructor scribbled a diagram on a clipboard partial flaps. Rudder snap, idle throttle. Don't try it unless you're dying, he said. But it worked once. Stateside, at the Nevada Air Gunnery Range in late 1944, an instructor referenced the unnamed clip during a simulator review. He played 4 seconds of the film. No name attached, no pilot ID, just the angle. One instructor muttered, "I've seen that clip 12 times. Still can't figure how he held that yaw." They didn't need to name it. Everyone watching saw the same thing, a Thunderbolt skidding sideways mid-turn, guns lighting up, and a German fighter overshooting wide. Pilots began experimenting. In late '44, a pilot with the 78th Fighter Group in England logged a skip-yaw kill using flap rudder torque at 4,500 feet. He never filed it as such, but his debrief included a phrase, "initiated evasive from non-bank drift." By war's end, at least 7 confirmed kills across 3 units had notes referencing lateral displacements, unbanked turns, or rudder-induced slips under fire. They all described it differently. But they all described Rusk's move. The footage was never declassified, but the trick survived in air, not on paper. The Thunderbolt Rusk flew that day. Serial 4226791 was deemed non-repairable. Its tail section was twisted, rudder mounts warped, and right wing spar stress-tested to failure. It was stripped for parts and scrapped quietly in April 1944. No ceremony, no photos. As for Rusk, he never flew combat again. He was reassigned as a stateside instructor in Texas, then rotated into flight safety analysis. His reports were precise but impersonal. He never wrote about that day, not officially. In interviews years later, he rarely mentioned the maneuver. "Just a bad turn," he once said. "Too much rudder. Lucky mistake." But in 1963, during a post-retirement lecture at an aviation school, a student asked if the Thunderbolt could really yaw at low speed and survive it. Rusk didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He just said, "It's possible, but don't expect it to work twice." He died in 1989, never decorated for the kills, never cited in air doctrine. But the maneuver lived on in snippets of film, whispered tips, and forgotten corner case tactics passed down through squadrons. It was never named, never formally recorded. But in the dying days of winter 1944 over the trees near Forbach, an 18-year-old with a jammed rudder turned a 10-ton flying brick sideways and made 9 enemy fighters miss. You won't find it in any manual. But it bought him 7 minutes of life. And for 3 Germans, it cost everything. Your mission, now preserve these stories. If you know someone who flies, who studies air history, Who believes P-47s couldn't turn? Send them this reel. Let them see the slip that never should have worked.